My grandfather was worth $47 million when he died. The whole family expected to get rich. Instead, he left everything to Carlos, the janitor nobody paid attention to. We thought it was a mistake. We were wrong about everything. Let me start from the beginning. My grandfather, William Montgomery, built his fortune from absolutely nothing. Started with a single convenience store in 1962, turned it into a chain of 200 locations across 3 states. The man was ruthless in business but seemed to have a soft spot for strays. Stray dogs, stray employees, stray family members who couldn't get their lives together. That last category included most of us, if I'm being honest. My father, Richard, was grandfather's oldest son and had been waiting his entire life to inherit the business. Never worked a day outside the family company, never had to. My Aunt Patricia married well and spent her time organizing charity galas and spending other people's money. My cousin Derek thought he was some kind of business genius because he read Forbes magazine and wore expensive suits. Then there was me, Michael. Fresh out of business school, convinced I was going to revolutionize the family empire with my cutting-edge ideas about social media marketing and millennial consumer habits. We all circled grandfather like vultures in those final years, especially after his first heart attack at 82. That's when Carlos entered our lives, though none of us really noticed at first. Grandfather hired him through some agency after his previous housekeeper retired. Carlos was maybe 45, quiet, barely spoke English when he started. Did his job without complaint, kept to himself, never asked for anything extra. The family treated him like furniture. Invisible. Dad would bark orders at him like he was a servant in some period drama. Aunt Patricia would leave messes for him to clean up just because she could. Derek would make jokes about deporting him back to wherever he came from, though Carlos was actually from El Salvador and had been here legally for over a decade. I wasn't much better. I'd nod politely when I saw him, maybe say good morning, but I never really saw him as a person. He was just the guy who emptied the trash and mopped the floors while we discussed important family business. Grandfather, though. Grandfather was different with Carlos. I noticed it but didn't think much of it at the time. He'd actually talk to him, ask about his day, his family. Sometimes I'd catch them sitting together in the kitchen, Carlos drinking coffee while grandfather had his afternoon tea. They'd be speaking in this broken mix of English and Spanish that somehow worked. When I asked grandfather about it once, he just shrugged and said Carlos was good company. Said he reminded him of himself when he was young and hungry. I figured it was just old man loneliness talking. The second heart attack came 2 years later. Grandfather survived, but barely. The doctor said his time was limited, maybe 6 months if he was lucky. That's when the family circus really began. Suddenly everyone was grandfather's best friend. Dad started visiting daily, bringing grandfather's favorite cigars and talking about the old days. Aunt Patricia would show up with expensive flowers and photo albums, reminiscing about family vacations from 30 years ago. Derek pitched business expansion ideas that would have bankrupted us in 6 months, but he presented them like he was Steve Jobs unveiling the iPhone. I played the game too. Brought my laptop over to show grandfather social media analytics, talked about brand synergy and customer engagement metrics. He'd nod and smile, but I could tell his heart wasn't in it. None of our hearts were really in it. We were all just positioning ourselves for the reading of the will. Through all of this, Carlos kept working. Cleaning, organizing, helping grandfather with daily tasks as his health declined. The man never missed a day, never complained, never asked for special treatment even as grandfather got sicker and needed more help. I remember one afternoon about a month before grandfather died, I was there going through some business documents with him when he had one of his dizzy spells. He started to fall getting up from his chair, and Carlos appeared out of nowhere to catch him. Gentle as anything, helped him sit back down, got him some water, stayed with him until the spell passed. Grandfather looked at Carlos with this expression I'd never seen before. Pure gratitude mixed with something else. Respect, maybe? He said something in Spanish that made Carlos smile, one of the few times I'd ever seen emotion on the man's face. When grandfather died 3 months later, the whole family gathered at the lawyer's office like it was Christmas morning. We'd all been speculating about how the fortune would be divided. Dad assumed he'd get the business and the house. Aunt Patricia was counting on enough to maintain her lifestyle. Derek had already started making plans for his inheritance. I figured I'd get enough to pay off my student loans and maybe start my own company. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, had been the family attorney for 20 years. Serious man with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of lawyer who charged $500 an hour and was worth every penny. He opened the will with all the usual legal language, then got to the important part. To my son Richard, I leave my collection of vintage cars and the sum of $50,000. To my daughter Patricia, I leave my wife's jewelry and the sum of $50,000. To my grandson Derek, I leave my golf club membership and the sum of $50,000. To my grandson Michael, I leave my library and the sum of $50,000. We all looked at each other. These weren't life-changing amounts, but we figured they were just the appetizers. The main course was coming. Mr. Harrison continued. The remainder of my estate, including all business holdings, real property, investments, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $47 million, I leave to Carlos Eduardo Mendoza, who has shown me more kindness and loyalty in 3 years than my own family has in a lifetime. The silence in that room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Dad's face went through about 6 different colors. Aunt Patricia looked like she was having a stroke. Derek just kept opening and closing his mouth like a fish. I was the first one to speak. There has to be some mistake. Mr. Harrison shook his head. No mistake. Mr. Montgomery was very specific about his wishes. He also left this letter to be read to the family. He opened a sealed envelope and began reading in grandfather's voice, or at least how I remembered it. If you're hearing this, it means I'm dead and you're all probably very angry. Good. Maybe anger will motivate you to do something productive with your lives for once. I've spent the last 5 years watching all of you circle me like carrion birds, pretending to care about me while really caring about my money. Not one of you asked how I was feeling. Not one of you spent time with me just to spend time. Every conversation was about business, about inheritance, about what you wanted from me. Carlos never asked me for anything. Never hinted about money or inheritance. He worked hard, treated me with respect, and became the closest thing to a real friend I've had in years. He told me about his family back in El Salvador, about his dreams of opening a small restaurant someday, about his daughter who's studying to be a nurse. He listened when I talked about your grandmother, about the early days of the business, about my regrets. You want to know why I left him everything? Because he's the only one who saw me as a person instead of a bank account. I hope this teaches you something about the value of genuine human connection. Probably won't, but an old man can hope. The room exploded. Dad started shouting about contesting the will, about undue influence, about grandfather not being in his right mind. Aunt Patricia was crying, but they were angry tears, not sad ones. Derek was already on his phone, probably calling lawyers. Mr. Harrison waited for the noise to die down, then delivered the final blow. I should mention that Mr. Montgomery anticipated this reaction. The will is ironclad, witnessed by 3 independent parties, and Mr. Montgomery underwent psychological evaluation just 6 months ago to confirm his mental competency. Any attempt to contest will result in the forfeiture of your individual bequests as well. That shut everyone up fast. $50,000 wasn't much compared to what we'd expected, but it was better than nothing. As we were leaving the office, Dad grabbed my arm. We need to do something about this, he said. That wetback conned a sick old man out of our inheritance. We can't let him get away with it. I should have walked away right then. Should have accepted that grandfather made his choice and maybe even learned something from it. Instead, I let Dad's anger infect me. Let the disappointment and embarrassment override my better judgment. Over the next few weeks, the family held a series of increasingly desperate meetings. Dad wanted to hire private investigators to dig up dirt on Carlos. Aunt Patricia suggested we could intimidate him into giving back the money. Derek had some half-baked plan involving insurance fraud. All of their ideas were either illegal or stupid, usually both. But I had a different approach. I'd studied psychology in business school, understood how to manipulate people's emotions and decisions. I convinced the family to let me handle it. My plan was elegant in its cruelty. I would befriend Carlos, gain his trust, then systematically destroy his life until he was desperate enough to give us back the inheritance just to make it stop. We'd start small. Anonymous complaints to immigration services, even though he was here legally. Reports to the IRS claiming he was hiding income. Complaints to the health department about the restaurant he was planning to open with grandfather's money. Then we'd escalate. Vandalism of his property, anonymous threatening letters, harassment of his family members, social media campaigns painting him as a con artist who took advantage of a sick old man. We'd make his life so miserable that he'd be begging to give us the money just to be left alone. The family loved it. Dad said it was the smartest thing I'd ever come up with. Aunt Patricia clapped her hands like I just performed a magic trick. Derek wanted to know if we could trademark the strategy. I started small. Showed up at Carlos's apartment building with flowers and a sad story about how much I missed grandfather. Told him I was sorry for how the family had treated him, that I understood why grandfather left him the money. Carlos was suspicious at first, but I was persistent. Charming. I'd learned from the best after all. Within a month, I'd convinced him I was the only member of the family who wasn't bitter about the inheritance. We'd meet for coffee once a week, and I'd listen to his plans for the restaurant, his concerns about managing so much money, his guilt about the family's reaction. He was actually a fascinating man once you got him talking. He'd been an accountant back in El Salvador before the Civil War forced him to flee. Had a master's degree in business administration that wasn't recognized in the US. So he'd been working odd jobs for 15 years while slowly learning English and saving money to bring his family north. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a man more qualified to run grandfather's business than any of us, reduced to cleaning toilets because of circumstances beyond his control. But I pushed that thought away. I had a job to do. While I was playing the long game, the rest of the family started their harassment campaign. Dad filed complaints with immigration services claiming Carlos was using false documents. Aunt Patricia spread rumors at her country club about the Mexican who conned poor William Montgomery. Derek created fake social media accounts to leave negative reviews for Carlos's planned restaurant before it even opened. The pressure started to show. Carlos looked tired during our coffee meetings, distracted. He mentioned problems with permits for his restaurant, issues with his landlord, anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. I played the concerned friend perfectly, offering support while secretly coordinating the attacks. 3 months into our campaign, I thought we were winning. Carlos seemed worn down, stressed, jumping at shadows. During one of our meetings, he actually asked if I thought the family would consider accepting some kind of settlement. Maybe he could give back half the inheritance if they'd just leave him alone. I pretended to consider it, said I'd talk to the family, see what I could do. Internally, I was celebrating. The plan was working perfectly. That's when everything went wrong. I was at home that evening, feeling pretty good about myself when I got a call from Dad. His voice was shaking, not with anger but with fear. "We need to stop," he said. "We need to stop everything right now." "What are you talking about?" "I just got a call from Harrison, the lawyer. Carlos isn't just some janitor, Michael. We fucked up. We fucked up so bad." Dad had finally done some actual research on Carlos Eduardo Mendoza instead of just assuming he was an easy target. Turns out Carlos had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years, and we'd never bothered to look past our own prejudices to see who he really was. Carlos Eduardo Mendoza wasn't just an accountant back in El Salvador. He'd been the youngest finance minister in the country's history before the Civil War. When the government fell, he'd been targeted for assassination by the incoming regime. The U.S. State Department had helped him disappear, given him a new identity, a new life. But that wasn't the most shocking part. After arriving in the U.S., Carlos had quietly been building his own fortune. He'd been investing grandfather's paychecks for 3 years, turning $30,000 a year into nearly $2 million through a combination of brilliant market timing and insider knowledge of Central American emerging markets. He didn't need grandfather's inheritance. He'd been wealthy the entire time. The anonymous harassment we'd been putting him through? He traced it all back to us within the first month. The fake immigration complaints, the social media attacks, the threatening letters. He had documented everything, recorded every conversation, built a federal case against us for conspiracy, harassment, and attempted extortion. But he'd let us continue because he wanted to see how far we'd go, how low we'd sink. He'd been testing us the same way grandfather had, and we'd failed spectacularly. The next morning, I got a text from Carlos. Simple message, coffee at 10. Same place as always. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to run, maybe leave town, pretend none of this had happened. But I'd made this mess, and I owed it to myself to face the consequences. Carlos was already there when I arrived, sitting at our usual table. He looked different somehow. The nervous, beaten-down man I'd been manipulating for months was gone. In his place sat someone who radiated quiet authority, the kind of presence that comes from surviving actual life-or-death situations. "Sit down, Michael," he said, and for the first time I heard his real voice. Perfect English with just a trace of accent, the voice of someone who'd given speeches to international banking committees. I sat, waited for him to destroy me. Instead, he smiled. Not a cruel smile, but something sadder. Almost pitying. Your grandfather was a good man, he said. Flawed, like all of us, but good. He saw potential in people, believed they could change, grow, become better than they were. He saw that in you too. I started to speak, but he held up a hand. I have enough evidence to put your entire family in federal prison, he continued. Conspiracy, harassment, attempted extortion, hate crimes. Your father's immigration complaints alone could get him 5 years. Your aunt's social media campaign qualifies as cyberstalking. Your cousin's fake reviews constitute wire fraud. My mouth was dry. I managed to croak out a single word. Why? Why haven't I destroyed you already? Because your grandfather asked me not to. That stopped me cold. Carlos reached into his briefcase and pulled out a letter. Old paper, grandfather's handwriting. He gave me this the day before he died, Carlos said. Told me you'd probably come after me, that I should be ready. But he also said you weren't really bad people, just spoiled and angry. He hoped that maybe losing the inheritance would teach you something about what really matters. He handed me the letter. I recognized grandfather's shaky handwriting immediately. Carlos, if you're reading this, it means my family is causing you trouble. I'm sorry for that. They're not evil, just lost. They've never had to struggle, never learned the value of hard work or genuine relationships. Maybe this will be their wake-up call. If they come after you, defend yourself, but don't destroy them. They're still my blood, even if they've forgotten what that means. Help them if you can. If they're willing to learn, teach them. If not, at least give them a chance to walk away with their dignity intact. They're going to need all the dignity they can get. I looked up at Carlos, who was watching me with those same patient eyes that had watched grandfather die. So here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to go back to your family and tell them the harassment stops now. Completely. No more complaints, no more letters, no more social media campaigns. You're going to apologize, sincerely, for what you've done. And then you're all going to figure out how to make something useful of your lives without your grandfather's money to fall back on. What if we don't? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Then I'll release everything to the FBI, and you'll all spend the next decade in federal prison. Your choice. He stood up, gathered his things, started to leave. Then he turned back. For what it's worth, Michael, you're smarter than the rest of them. You could have been something special if you'd put that intelligence towards something constructive instead of destructive. It's not too late to change. He left me sitting there with grandfather's letter and the weight of everything we'd done. I drove home in a daze, called a family meeting, explained what we'd learned about Carlos and how thoroughly we'd been outplayed. The reactions were predictable. Dad wanted to keep fighting, hire better lawyers, find some way to win. Aunt Patricia just kept crying and asking how we could have been so wrong about everything. Derek went quiet, probably calculating how much federal prison would hurt his dating prospects. I was the one who finally convinced them to stop. Showed them grandfather's letter, explained exactly how much evidence Carlos had against us, painted a vivid picture of what federal prison would be like for people accustomed to country club memberships and designer clothes. We sent Carlos a formal apology letter, signed by all of us. Promised to leave him alone, to never contact him again, to never speak publicly about the inheritance. In return, he agreed not to press charges. That was 2 years ago. I haven't seen or spoken to Carlos since that final coffee meeting, but I followed his story from a distance. He opened his restaurant 6 months later, a small place called El Corazon that specializes in traditional Salvadoran cuisine. The reviews are incredible. He's also quietly donated over $10 million to refugee assistance programs and education initiatives. He's exactly the kind of person grandfather would have been proud to call family. As for us, we all learned different lessons from the experience. Dad eventually found work as a manager at an auto parts store, his first real job at age 58. He seems happier than he's been in years, though he'd never admit it. Aunt Patricia got a job at a nonprofit, discovered she actually enjoys helping people when there's no social status involved. Derek moved to Portland and started a food truck that's actually doing pretty well. And me? I took Carlos's advice and tried to become something special. Used my business degree to start a consulting firm that helps small immigrant-owned businesses navigate regulations and access capital. It's not making me rich, but it's making a difference. Sometimes I think about that last conversation with Carlos, about grandfather's letter, about how differently things could have gone if we just accepted his decision with grace. But maybe this was better. Maybe we needed to hit rock bottom before we could build something real. I never got the chance to tell grandfather I was sorry for disappointing him, for proving him wrong about our potential for growth. But I like to think he'd be proud of who we became after we lost everything. That's the thing about inheritance. Sometimes the most valuable thing someone can leave you isn't money. Sometimes it's the chance to discover who you really are when everything else is stripped away. Carlos was right. It's never too late to change, even for spoiled, angry people who should have known better.